Election is little more than a year away, so how can Conservatives win in 2019? Joining us on the convention floor is the CBC's Catherine Cullen. She joins us now to begin our conversation. Catherine, nice to have you on. We should point out that we are streaming this live as well, not only here on News Network, but on Facebook. And for people to take part in that, they can head over to our Facebook page. That is at facebook.com/CBC News. You can also leave your questions in the comment section, and then Catherine and I, over the next 20 to 25 minutes, will try to answer them to the best of our abilities. But let's begin there at the convention, Catherine. You're right there in Halifax, hearing what delegates are debating, what they are deciding. What is the latest?
Well, we want to talk about one big resolution that actually just failed. It's one that we've been talking about all day, the lead up to this, and it has to do with abortion. This was a resolution that would strike something out of Conservative social policy, specifically a part of Conservative social policy that said a Conservative government will not support any legislation to regulate abortion. So what this would have meant was the intention of this policy resolution was to open the door to the possibility the future Conservative government would put restrictions on abortion, let's say around something like sex-selective abortion. There had been a lot of debate about this. There's a whole process it has to go through before getting to this main room, the approximately 3,000 delegates. Let's take a listen to how everything played out when it actually came to a vote here on the convention floor.
The vote. On ferme le vote. It's defeated.
So you can hear the reaction there in the room. There was some very passionate debate on both sides of this issue. Michael, certainly people who feel very strongly that this is something that Conservatives and Conservative MPs should have a right to have their say on. They said, you know, the party recently at its last convention in Vancouver a couple of years ago eliminated its stance on same-sex marriage. And they said, well, we don't have an official stance on same-sex marriage. Why should it not be the same for abortion? We don't have an official policy. We let people make up their own minds. On the other side of the room, because there is a debate back and forth before these votes actually happen, you heard from people like MP Lisa Raitt, who said, listen, there was just a leadership race. Andrew Scheer was very clear on where he stands on this issue, not so much personally, but where he stands on it as a matter of policy. Andrew Scheer has said he is going to respect, a Conservative government would respect the will of the courts on the question of abortion. They would not go ahead and put forward any legislation to change the status quo. People talked about this being a divisive issue that could stop the Conservatives from winning in the next election, and that is apparently the perspective that carried the day here.
So delegates going along with their leader, as you say, Andrew Scheer is pro-life. He is not in favor of abortion, but he says the party is not going to touch it, and the delegates have now essentially backed him up with this vote. But that said, a lot to talk about here, not only the policy that's happening on the floor, because this is important as we head into the 2019 election here and another sitting of Parliament. But it's also significant, this gathering, because on Thursday we saw that dramatic resignation from Maxime Bernier, in which he called the party in its current form under Andrew Scheer intellectually and morally corrupt. What is the reaction in Halifax among delegates some 48 hours after Bernier made that dramatic announcement?
I would say the seas have started to calm, if we want to flog some terrible weather metaphors for a minute, Michael. Last night when Peter MacKay, of course, formerly a Conservative cabinet minister, very well known from the area, gave a speech, he never mentioned Maxime Bernier, and people are not mentioning him up on stage, but there are these allusions made to him. Peter MacKay said something to the effect of, you know, we had some bad weather blow in temporarily, but I think that hurricane is gone. You know, it's a bit cute, but I think there's a real point there. The idea of what Maxime Bernier was doing really did hit with some force, but the Conservatives have a lot of motivation to minimize the impact of this and to try to move on as quickly as possible, because the fact of the matter is Maxime Bernier is going to be going after some of the very same voters with his intention to start a new political party that the Conservatives are, and they feel a bit, I think, that they have the wind in their sails right now. They're happy with how their polling numbers have what they've shown in the past few months, showing them to be relatively competitive with the Trudeau government. There's a real sense, I think, amongst the people here of the possibility for this party in 2019. But as soon as you have another small C Conservative siphoning off some of that vote. That makes that a lot more difficult. And a lot of people who are in the room today are going to remember an era not so long ago when the right was divided in Canada. Now, that's not to say that there's a perfect parallel to what's happening with Maxime Bernier. I think there are very serious questions about how major a threat he represents. But even if it is not, a direct schism, a small siphoning of the vote is a very serious thing. So people here, while they, I think, are wondering what the impact of it is, they are trying to just push forward, keep focused on the party, and really marginalize him, marginalize discussion about him, and by minimizing him, hopefully keep everybody's attention on what's going on here and not what Maxime Bernier is up to elsewhere.
Well, that said, as people in the room there are trying to move on, there are still questions. And on our social media pages right now, because this conversation is not only happening on News Network, but also on our Facebook page as well as on our YouTube channel, Kiros on YouTube is asking you, Catherine, to perhaps comment on Bernier's plans forward, because he does say he wants to start, as you alluded to, wants to start another Conservative party. But what's the likelihood of that? Talk about the logistical issues that he faces in forming a slate of people ahead of the next election.
Well, not only does he want to form a new party, run a full slate of candidates, so that's 338 candidates. He's got one right now. His name is Maxime Bernier. He's got to do all the sort of the process that's involved with setting this up. So he's talked about the fact that he's going to speak to Elections Canada, even questions around what he's going to be doing with fundraising, the existing money he had fundraised as a member of the Conservative Party, stopping that, asking people to now turn their attention to his website, give money directly to him. But it is an incredible undertaking. I think a lot of people don't understand what goes into the political process and all the hard work that goes on behind the scenes in any political party. A lot of people are pointing to, for instance, what Jason Kenney has done in Alberta, right? He has started a new political party, United Conservative Party, uniting the right in that province. There had to be a leadership vote. It was a very intensive process. And a lot of people, to be very frank, I think of Michelle Rempel, for example, have called into question Maxime Bernier's work ethic and suggested that their experience with him in caucus does not suggest that he has the kind of work ethic necessary to do that. Now that, again, we're talking about that kind of marginalizing of him. Hey, guys, don't vote for him. He's not a hard worker. He abandoned our party. Maxime Bernier, though...
but he did have 49% of the vote in the leadership race. He came second to Andrew Scheer with 49% support of delegates. So what type of support does he have within the membership, if not him, the ideas that he espoused? Smaller governments, no to supply management, as well as revisiting immigration in this country.
All very powerful ideas, certainly, and when you look at the support for some of them out there in the population, that is where the real, I think, threat comes from. Take supply management, for example. I mean, this is not, the people in this room right now are not necessarily a perfect sample of the kinds of people that Maxime Bernier is out to get to vote for him. These are some of the most dedicated Conservatives you're going to meet, right? There are 3,000 people who have come from places across the country, often at their own personal expense, to be here. But there are still a few people here who have said, listen, I'm going to follow Max. Are they in the minority? Yes, I think we can safely say that. But over issues, for instance, like supply management, that was supposed to be one of the policy resolutions that could have come to the floor yesterday. They didn't even get around to talking about it in one of the smaller groups.
Let me jump in there.
Some people were disgusted by that. Yeah.
Okay, let me jump in there, because Robert Langille on Facebook is asking for you to compare the Conservative policy regarding supply management and what Maxime Bernier is espousing.
Polar opposites. And in fact, this is what we saw in the leadership race. There's this iconic image, perhaps to Andrew Scheer's chagrin, I'm not sure, of him at the press gallery dinner making a joke about how much dairy farmers helped him in the leadership race. And he sort of chugs 1 liter of milk. He's got a bit of milk rolling down his chin. It was obviously supposed to be a very funny speech, as a matter of fact. But Maxime Bernier has made the point that Andrew Scheer, he's committed to supporting this system of supply management. Maxime Bernier wants to dismantle it. He says the dairy prices, eggs, poultry, cheaper for Canadians. That is true free market principles. That's what he believes in. He's somebody who identifies on the more libertarian end of the spectrum. Andrew Scheer has aligned himself with farmers, and it was clear that was an important part of his pitch in the leadership race. So they are diametrically opposed on this issue. Even if it had come to the floor, the question of supply management here, I don't see how Andrew Scheer could have reversed his own position.
I want to talk about the policy on the floor right now because there is some interest on our social media pages about this. I'm going to bring two of them at the same time. Nick West is on Facebook.
Sure.
He's asking about how Conservatives plan to deal with climate change. Also on Facebook, Lynn Jeffrey, she is asking whether or not the party's talking about tackling the healthcare system.
Answers to both those. So let's start with the question of climate change. The way that is being spoken about, certainly with the greatest intensity here, has to do with the question of carbon taxation. In fact, it was one of the early resolutions that they voted on. Essentially, I mean, it is blatantly clear, it's been a big part of the discussion here. The Conservative Party of Canada does not agree with carbon tax in any way, shape, or form, certainly not the way that Justin Trudeau is proposing to ensure this pan-Canadian climate agenda, right, which involves the provinces and territories putting their own systems in place. But it is anathema to the Conservative Party. So they're not interested in a carbon tax. So the question becomes, how do they want to deal with climate change, which is what I think the viewer is asking about. I interviewed Andrew Scheer. I was guest hosting Vashi Kapelos' show, Power and Politics, a few weeks ago. He promises that he has an environmental plan coming. I tried to prod him a little bit and say, well, what are we talking about? Are we talking about tax incentives? How is it that you would get companies, polluters, everyday Canadians to reduce their emissions? Basically, his answer is stay tuned. It was not entirely clear whether he is saying that he is committing to achieving the Paris Climate Agreement targets. He sort of tried to dodge and weave a little bit there, but I think that that's something that we will want to watch closely because those were, of course, targets that were first put in place by Stephen Harper. What was the other issue? Yeah.
Well, you actually, I think you've covered them both. One was climate change. The other one was, healthcare, actually.
Okay, the discussions that I've seen thus far in here that have to do with healthcare seem to be dealing with perhaps the more contentious social policy issues. I mean, don't forget that ultimately healthcare is the domain of the provinces, although when we look at the current government, of course, there's always a question of health transfers. Justin Trudeau's government has tried to make some strings attached to get provinces to hit particular targets, but the discussion here has largely been around some of the more contentious social policy issues. So we're talking about things like palliative care, medical, well, I don't know if palliative care is in and of itself contentious, but finding the money to properly resource the system is certainly something of concern. Medical assistance in dying. In fact, they passed a resolution not too long ago here that says that the Conservative Party would not support the extension of medical aid or medical assistance in dying to mature minors. Because while that is now legal in Canada writ large, offering people medical assistance in dying, doing so to mature minors is still something that's being discussed right now. It's actually, there's a report that's being written up, and it is something that Justin Trudeau's government has said that they're going to look at.
Okay, well, listen, Catherine, we're going to take a pause here, but get ready, because even though delegates on the floor want to move on to policy, we're getting a barrage of questions actually about Maxime Bernier and what his future might look like. So we're going to talk about that right now here on CBC News Network. But we will say, for those watching on TV on CBC News Network, we're going to take a short break right now, but the conversation does continue on Facebook. You can head over to our CBC News Facebook page. That's at facebook.com/CBC News. You can also leave your questions in the comment section. So again, on CBC News Network, we will be back with this conversation right after the break. Those who are watching on Facebook, on YouTube, stand by. We're back in a few seconds. We're continuing our conversation. And we do continue our conversation with Catherine Cullen, talking about the Conservative Policy Convention taking place in Halifax right now. The last opportunity for the party to come together as it works towards another session in Parliament, as well as the 2019 election coming up next year. Catherine Cullen is at the convention. She's been answering all of our questions. So Catherine, as I said, a lot of people are still asking about Maxime Bernier, whether or not the people on the floor want to move on to policy. A lot of questions about Bernier. So I'm just going to take these in a row. And to be fair, you may not have the answers to these, but let's go through them. Catherine Senecal
I'll try.
Yeah, I know you will. Catherine Senecal is on Facebook, and she says, what would Bernier's party be called? Which may be premature, but he is a libertarian.
Great. No, it's a wonderful question, and I sort of have an answer, which is that he is soliciting suggestions for the name for his new party. He says you can go to his website and make a suggestion. I feel like in the era of social media, that might be a dangerous thing to do. I already saw somebody today making the suggestion of Votey McVoteface. Little riff on Bodie McBoatface there. But he's looking for ideas. And he did say the other day when he held his news conference, he's getting things out of the gate right now. Although, as he works to establish this new political party, he did do a round of interviews yesterday. We're told, though, he's gone on vacation now. Although I see he's still tweeting today and throwing a little bit of shade at these guys. So the question of naming the party, work in progress.
Maybe it should just be party
If
to the...
If you have any suggestions...
I was going to say just party to the max, maybe.
Hey, how about that?
I don't know how it would work in both official languages, but that said, let's now move on to another question here. This is from Mats16, and he's on Twitter. And again, this has to do with the process. He says, would Maxime Bernier be holding a leadership convention in the new party, or is he the self-declared dictator, is how he puts it?
Whoa. You know what? I will guarantee you that he will not self-declare as a dictator. How about that? Yeah, he's the leader of the party. And he did say yesterday, it was interesting, he did an interview with our colleagues at Power and Politics, a great interview with Bashi Capellos, in which he talked about why he thought he could become prime minister in the next election, which I think a lot of people would say when you just look at historical precedent.
One second, Catherine.
That's very ambitious.
1 second, Catherine.
Yep.
And we have put Catherine on a pause. And if you are joining us once again on CBC News Network, you may wonder why we are already discussing and talking. And that's because we continued our conversation about the Conservative Policy Convention on our social media streams on Facebook and YouTube. But we're now back with CBC News Network. Catherine, I'll let you finish your thought there, because the question was whether or not there would be a leadership race for Maxime Bernier if he were to start this new party.
No, I mean, it is his party, and you can look at other precedents. I mean, I think right now of what's happening in Quebec, the CAQ, François Legault, started his own party. If you're going to start your own party, you don't open yourself up to challengers right away. There's a lot of other work to do. Although I think the questioner specifically asked if he would be the dictator of his own party, and the self-described dictator, and I don't think that that's very likely. So no leadership race. There's plenty of other work to do when you're starting up your own federal party, and believe that you can run a full slate of candidates and that you have a real shot at becoming prime minister in the next election.
Yeah, it's hard to sell dictator on a pamphlet that you leave at a door. That said, listen, Lynn Guidos is on Facebook as well, and she makes a comment and wants your thoughts on this. She identifies as a conservative, and she says, I see it as any vote for Bernier is a vote for Trudeau. And she's wondering, you, Catherine, being in Halifax, is that a common opinion being shared amongst conservatives right now gathered in Nova Scotia?
That is verbatim what Andrew Scheer said many times during his news conference to respond to Maxime Bernier's announcement. So Maxime Bernier made what was something of a shocking, dramatic announcement. We heard from Andrew Scheer right after, and I have to say that particular day, if I could just make a quick aside, what an ugly moment in Canadian politics. The real frustration and some of the language that was used by the two sides. And I think Andrew Scheer really did make a real effort to be calm there. But that sort of ill will seen so overtly between two people who just recently were in the same caucus is really something quite extraordinary. But as for whether or not he's helping Justin Trudeau, that's certainly what Andrew Scheer is telling Conservative Party faithful, because if there's one person they really don't like, by and large, it is Justin Trudeau, right? He is their political opponent, and what you hear here is they really dislike a lot of his policies. So by painting Maxime Bernier with that same brush, that is something one more way to minimize what Maxime Bernier is offering in terms of what Andrew Scheer has to say. To what extent is it true? Well, I mean, listen, any true division in the small c conservative spectrum, it's true. That makes life easier for the Liberal Party of Canada. Now, Maxime Bernier's argument is that because he will appeal to people beyond just their traditional conservative spectrum, he points to all the people who just didn't vote last election but might be interested in his ideas. He believes that he can build up enough of a constituency that he could still become prime minister. But I don't think there's any way to talk about this without truly acknowledging the risk of splitting the right section of the conservative spectrum of voters, and that is a real gift to the Liberals. A few conservatives said Justin Trudeau must just be like popping his bottle of champagne and everybody's raising a glass at the Liberal retreat because, yes, it ultimately, it's hard to see how it's not good news for them.
Although we should point out that when the Prime Minister was asked about Maxime Bernier, he said he was not focused on what was happening with the Conservative Party. He was focused on his own party. As you say, they were taking part in that retreat.
Very smart politics to let them just shoot at each other and stay the heck out of it.
Yeah, exactly. Save the ammunition for later. But I want to bring in now a question from Jim Constant, and he's on Facebook. He says, and I'm going to read this verbatim, I wonder if Conservatives are looking into Indigenous relations moving forward.
Andrew Scheer did make a mention of First Nations yesterday in his speech. It was brief, but he did at the end of his speech talk about how that was part of the positive vision that his party was going to offer to Canadians. And he really did put a lot of emphasis. It was a 55-minute speech, so he covered a lot of ground yesterday. But he really did try to push the idea of a positive Conservative vision for Canada. I was told by one of Scheer's advisors at one point that we would see a clearer policy around First Nations issues. We haven't seen it yet, but I think it's worth noting that we're still over a year out from the election campaign. Traditionally, parties don't put too much on the table in terms of policy because they don't want to give their opponents too much time to basically break that policy down. So I think it's something that we definitely want to watch for to see how Andrew Scheer is going to talk about any issues related to how the Conservative Party plans to engage with First Nations and potentially woo those voters. Certainly Justin Trudeau has made that a cornerstone of his offering to Canadians, is a desire for better relationships with First Nations people.
Okay, let's bring in another question now. This one is coming to us from Neil Cotton, Catherine, and actually, excuse me, Christopher Murray. Let me start there. Christopher Murray on Facebook is asking, does this party have any intentions of reversing the legalization of cannabis?
To the best of my knowledge, no. That said, they are raising a lot of questions about how effective Justin Trudeau's plans around all of this are. And the writ large cannabis legalization is actually something that I cover on Parliament Hill. And I would just say it is an incredibly complex issue. Things are going to go wrong. I think it is almost inevitable. You have people like Anne McClellan, the chair of the Cannabis Task Force, say that something's going to go wrong. We don't know what, just because of the scope of this change. I think you will want to watch to see how the Conservatives respond to those problems. I think they're going to be quick to criticize Justin Trudeau, but there has never been any commitment that I can think of to actually reverse the policy. And if you look at what's happening with Conservative governments across the provincial Conservative governments across the country, they are putting this in place, right? So there is a certain amount of Conservatives in Canada going along with this. Just questions about the execution.
Okay. Now let's go to Neil Cotton again on Facebook. Quote, for both Scheer and Bernier, what are their views on the border and third country policy? He's talking about safe third country policy. Maybe compare what the two are saying about that, Catherine.
Excellent question. Excellent question. And part of the reason it's such an excellent question is because this is such a powerful issue for Canadian Conservatives. When we look at that, there was a recent poll by the Angus Reid Institute that showed that on this particular issue, specifically asylum seekers, people crossing the border, a greater number of people thought that Andrew Scheer could handle the issue better than Justin Trudeau. So this is really something where the Conservatives have potential, I think, to perk up voters' ears. There is polls clearly show real malaise among some Canadians about the way this issue is playing out. Now, the question of how we compare Scheer to Bernier. The Conservatives have offered a few solutions in terms of how they see trying to address this issue. Basically, they want to stop people from coming across the border one way or another. Andrew Scheer regularly refers to it as queue jumping. Maxime Bernier has also seized on this issue. It's been one of the big ones he's been tweeting about in the past couple of weeks as he's built up this head of steam around himself as a politician apart from the Conservative movement. What he has not offered, to the best of my knowledge, are very clear policy ideas to differentiate himself from Andrew Scheer's method of dealing with this. He is just perhaps, I don't even know if you could say he's shown more frustration. They're both glomming onto it. How they might deal with it differently remains to be seen, but it's an issue to watch because, as I say, it is a very powerful one for the Conservatives.
Okay, Catherine, I have to say we're quickly running out of time here, but I do want to put in a couple more questions. So maybe keep in mind that we're looking about a minute each here in terms of an answer.
Okay.
Pamela Walker-Clark on Facebook, quote, where does this proposed new party place itself between the other three? And I think what she means here is not placement in the Commons, but in terms of on the ideological scale.
I don't know that I've heard Maxime Bernier articulate that. I think it is understood that he would put himself, well, no, he puts himself to the right of this Conservative Party because his allegation the other day was basically more or less that these guys are liberal light, that it's just Justin Trudeau, a watered down Justin Trudeau or something to that effect. So he would put himself on the right of the political spectrum from this Conservative Party.
And Srivas is asking this question, and interesting one. Can there be a coalition of Bernier Conservatives and Scheer Conservatives after an election, as no party would make a majority, which is a bit of an assumption there, we have to say.
Yes, fascinating question. I would say given the complete and utter acrimony of the past 72 hours, it's difficult to imagine. But hey, we didn't see ourselves here a couple weeks ago, and we're still talking about, what, 14 months till the federal election. So that would be wild. That would be really wild. But hey, it's been a pretty wild week. Who knows?
Yeah, as they say, politics makes strange bedfellows, so you never know.
Yes.
And here's the last question I'm going to ask you right now. Nancy Fortin is on Facebook, and she's asking about pensions and what Conservatives are planning to do about pensions.
That is an excellent question, and I'm trying to think off the top of my head whether or not I have an answer to that, but I think it's an important question. I don't know if I know specifically what the Conservatives are up to on that front, but I will acknowledge Nancy's question by saying that it is very much worthy of note that Justin Trudeau has created a minister responsible for seniors, that seniors, I think we can safely say, are going to be, and perhaps it's a bit crass to talk about it this way, but a voting cohort that the parties are going to be after in the next election. So I think that's a question Nancy should keep asking, keep a close eye on policy, because I think we can expect to see all three, and perhaps now four, five, let's throw Elizabeth May in there too, political parties making some serious offerings on that front.
Absolutely. Okay, Catherine.
And six, the Bloc Québécois. Sorry, guys.
There we go. Throwing it out there. Anyways, before we keep adding political parties, let's now say thank you to everyone that has joined us on Facebook as well as YouTube, asking your questions as well, of course, right here on CBC News Network. And as we wrap this up, Catherine, maybe walk us through what is left to be done today at the Conservative Convention in Halifax.
I have lost track, I will admit, while we were talking, because everybody had such great questions, including you, Michael, of where we are precisely in the order of voting on policies. But I believe there's still some of that left to do. There's a fireside chat later today with Andrew Scheer and his wife, Jill Scheer. We really are getting to the tail end of all of this. I think it'll be a lot of sort of feel-good goodbye stuff to wrap up this convention, but still some policy work to do, and still plenty of things to keep an eye on. I mean, we talked about the contentious social policy issues. There's lots of interesting stuff in here, and if you're a bit of a policy wonk, like a lot of people in this room and a lot of people in the Parliament Hill Bureau, I guess I'd encourage people to go to cbc.ca/politics and keep an eye on what happens with the rest of these resolutions.
That's right, because here at the CBC, policy wonk is a compliment. Catherine, Cullen, thank you. Thank you for that, Catherine. We'll speak again a bit later.
It was fun.
It was fun. And again, thank you to everyone that participated. You are watching CBC News Network. Thank you to the social media streams, Facebook and YouTube. Thank you on News Network. But do stay with us. Much more to come right here on the program. Coming up, we're going to get the latest through the Conservative Convention as it continues to wrap up in Halifax. Also coming up in the next hour, we will speak to Christopher Alexander, the former Immigration and Citizenship Minister under Stephen Harper. We're going to get his thoughts on what has happened in Halifax right now. But do stay with us. Much more to come right here on CBC News Network.